To get the dealer's cost, a list of rebates, plus discounted interest rates, click on the Car Cost Canada tab at any time during the video.
I'm finally getting a chance to drive the 2019 Genesis G70 Sport. Hot off the heels of winning 2019 North American Car of the Year and earning top marks in initial reliability, Genesis is on quite the roll. After a week behind the wheel, what exactly did I think about this rising star?
Spoiler alert, this car is friggin' awesome. I have been totally surprised and impressed at what Genesis has done. This does not feel like a Hyundai. This feels like a standalone brand that's luxurious, that's comfortable, that has lots of creature comforts, and that goes like stink. It's very powerful, very fast, and we're gonna get to all of that in a moment. But first, here's what I wanna do. I wanna start with 4 things that I don't love about this car, and the reason why I'm gonna start with it, I'm gonna group them all together, is so that you can assume everything else that we talk about, I think, is just as good as the competition, if not better in some cases. Okay, so here are the things that I'm not absolutely crazy about. Number 1, the exhaust note kind of sucks. They do have a sort of dynamic sound they pump into the cabin. You can adjust it through the infotainment system really easily, but it just sort of sounds kind of flat. Number 2, there isn't currently on the 2019 model an option for a full digital dashboard. So if you look at the digital cockpit from Audi, Mercedes has launched the mid-cycle refresh for the C-Class, a really cool looking dashboard. You can't get that here. However, from what I read, they are preparing to sell a version of this G70 in Asia with the digital dashboard. So one could assume that eventually it'll find its way over here. 3, if you get the Sport trim line, you only have 2 interior options available. Both are dark leather. The only difference is I have white contrast stitching in this model, and the option would be the red contrast stitching. I wish I had access to the full range of colors. There are 7 available throughout the range. However, on the Sport trim, as I mentioned, only 2. And finally, if you get into the back seat of this thing, it's really tight. I'll put a clip up right now. Caveat being that I'm tall, I'm 6 foot 2 inches tall, and I'm sitting behind my driver's position. But comparing this to both the C-Class and the 3 Series, which I currently own right now, they have a lot more room, and it's just tight, and yeah, I wish I had a little bit more space back there. But that's it. 4 things that I think are weak areas for improvement, but everything else is pretty awesome, so let's get to it. So what makes this thing a sports sedan? Well, for starters, it's got a really lovely turbocharged 3.3 liter V6 engine with 365 horsepower and 376 pounds-feet of torque. That's more than BMW, that's more than Audi, and that's more than Mercedes-Benz, and this thing is, deceptively quick. 0 to 100, Genesis says about 4.7 seconds. I believe them. It's got launch control. So this thing hauls the mail, and it's got a real sweet, broad torque curve that kicks your ass down low and just kind of whoosh builds. Lets off a little bit at the top of the range, as you would expect from a turbocharged engine, but this engine is sweet. The only thing is I wish it would sound a little bit nicer. As I mentioned, not a lot of exhaust happening. You do have this sort of dynamic piped in noise, whatever you want to call it, that you can turn off entirely if you want, but it just sounds just a little bit flat. What else do we have that makes this thing feel connected? Well, we have dynamic dampers that are adjustable via a drive mode selector down here in the transmission tunnel. So like a lot of other cars, we've got the standard modes, right? Comfort, Sport. And then we have an eco mode for improved fuel economy. And as you go through those modes, it's going to tighten the suspension up. So when you're in Sport, for example, the suspension gets taut. The sensitivity of the throttle pedal is increased. The transmission is going to hang on to gears a little bit longer. But here's the pro move, and this is what I do when I get into just about every single car. I go to the mode that Genesis calls custom, and then I give it the soft dampers so it can deal with the potholes and the ruts. And then I give it the hyperactive throttle pedal and transmission. Then I keep the steering weight in light, and to me that just makes it feel agile. Now, there is a 5th mode, it's called Smart, and I read about this, and I've been driving around in Smart mode a lot because I like the idea of it. Essentially, it's supposed to sort of read what you're doing, learn from it, and adjust accordingly. But the result is it just feels like it's in comfort mode to me, and then you mash your foot down and suddenly it's hanging on to gears, the transmission's freaking out, and the throttle's really sensitive. It just doesn't seem to be particularly good at anything. So I put it into custom mode, and I think that's the best way to go here. Also, not to be outdone in the braking department, they fitted this thing with Brembos to pull you down in a hurry. And we also have a sort of quasi torque vectoring system that works by sort of selectively braking wheels to help you around the corner, and HTRAC all-wheel drive, which is a rear bias all-wheel drive system. I think up to 90% of the power can go to the back, so it feels a little more dynamic, a little more like a traditional rear-wheel drive sedan. Of course, if you want an actual rear-wheel drive sedan, you can get the base manual transmission Genesis G70 that comes with that setup, and that's pretty cool. That tells me that they're looking out for the enthusiasts and they're sort of plugged into what's going on in the enthusiast community. But you know what? I think all-wheel drive for this Canadian weather where we've got snow on the ground suits me just fine. Swapping cogs is a new-ish 8-speed transmission from the Hyundai group, and it is bomb. It is a good transmission. You're driving around town, you're in comfort mode or eco mode or whatever, and the next thing you know, you're up to 7th or 8th gear suddenly, and you didn't even notice it. The shifts up and down are basically imperceptible. When you put it into sport mode, yeah, it's not a PDK, it's not a dual clutch transmission, but it's just as good as anything from ZF that I've driven in way more expensive cars. It's quick enough. The only maybe minor complaint I have is when you do take control via these paddles behind the steering wheel, there's not a very aggressive rev matching blip on the downshift, so you tend to get a little bit of a shudder, but again, in true auto mode, it's non-existent. This is a really, really solid, very impressive transmission from Genesis. Well, let's talk about this interior, because this was really the one space where I kind of thought I'd get into this thing and it would feel a little bit like a Hyundai. I've read, of course, good things about how it handles and its performance and so on and so forth, but I sort of thought, okay, they got to give up something somewhere, and I was wrong. This is a surprisingly nice cabin. There isn't a single thing, if I rotate my head from right to left, from the driver's position forward, that tells me they cut corners or they tried to make up for something. It just feels and looks, and importantly, I love this, it smells good. We're sitting on Napa leather seats. They're diamond stitched. They look like something out of a way, way more expensive car. And all the materials, even the stuff you know is plastic, like this top door panel, for example, parts of the dashboard, they've kind of rubberized it and made it look really convincing. This sort of brushed aluminum look in the door cards. We have more stitched leather on the door panel as well, all the way down here into the center console area, where rather than excessive amounts of piano black, we have a really nice sort of soft, warm kind of texture to this plastic and this brushed aluminum look. Everything looks distinctly Genesis. Nothing really looks like a Hyundai parts bin stuff, even though for those who have eagle eyes and are familiar with both brands, you will find a couple of buttons that are kind of the same, but they've done a good job of kind of reskinning this whole thing and making it look very premium. So from a materials perspective, color me impressed, and from a usability perspective, again, another home run from Genesis. I love these redundant buttons because it hasn't looked cluttered. However, there's easy access to everything. I mean, for example, in the center console area, you have your HVAC controls, which all feel really nice and textured. Then you have 2-stage heated steering wheel, 3-stage heated seats, cooled seats. All this stuff is standard, by the way. And then you have these redundant sort of toggle switches that'll quickly get you to your radio, or your your media, your map, your nav settings. There's a custom button here, then your vehicle setup options. So all this is just really clean, really clever. It looks good, it feels good, and the functionality is like a 10 out of 10. So in terms of technology, we don't have a ton of crazy stuff here, but everything that we do have is really, really good and works really, really well. I'll start with the heads-up display because I love it. It's really big, it's very bright, very easy to add or remove different pieces of information from it via a button on your steering wheel through this little LCD panel in your gauge cluster. And right now I've got everything up on here. So we have sign detection, so it's telling me my speed limit is 100 kilometers per hour on this highway, and it'll show your current speed, 103K. I've also also got both my radar guided cruise control and active lane keeping assist on right now, so there's 2 little green buttons telling me that. I also have an 8-inch infotainment screen. This is a touch screen. I prefer the sort of German style of having a wheel down in the transmission tunnel. I feel like it allows you to navigate things through sort of muscle memory while allowing you to keep sort of maximum focus on the road. But nonetheless, this is well within reachable sort of distance to go through here. And this is kind of like a reskinned Hyundai system, but it looks good, it's crisp, the graphics are nice, and it's just super easy to use. The touchscreen's responsive, which is what you expect in this type of technology these days. Yeah, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, comes standard equipment. Easy stuff to use here. Voice commands are pretty good. We also have a Bluetooth connectivity option, which is awesome, especially considering we have a wireless charging pad down here under this little cubby in the transmission tunnel. Now, the Bluetooth, for whatever reason, seems to connect so fast. Once you have it saved in your phone and it's on, you just get in and boom, it's on already, which is great because I feel like normally it takes 15 or 20 seconds in my personal car, and this seems to be just a little bit faster than everything else out there.
The G70 seems to borrow styling cues from many competitors, leading to a design that's sharp and athletic but hardly original. The color of my tester is Nürburgring green, which looks anywhere from slate gray to brilliant metallic green depending on the light conditions. In this trim we get dual exhaust, big air intakes, and sculpted rear haunches that extend over a subtle integrated trunk lid spoiler, giving it an understated but sporty look. By the way, that trunk lip spoiler disguises a disappointing trunk capacity of just under 300 liters.
So you take the all-wheel drive system, you take the dynamic dampers, the nice staggered tire setup you have in the summer, and that 3.3 liter engine, and this thing starts to feel like a true sports sedan. And the great news, if you're somebody like me who enjoys a good back road occasionally but has to do a lot of commuting, it's still important that this be comfortable, and this is as comfortable as the best of them in this segment, but it also pulls double duty and it feels so alive and so fleet of foot around corners. And what makes that even more impressive is the fact that it's not really light. It's a little bit more than 3,900 pounds in this trim, which is heavier than the BMW and heavier than the Giulia and right around the same weight as the C-Class. But of course you've got that power to pull out of the corners with that big chunky torque curve. And the steering wheel, yeah, it's like a lot of other cars on the road today. The steering feel is not transformative, but there's enough there to let you know what to do with the front wheels, to give you confidence that where you're placing the car, it's gonna go. So I'm in sport mode right now, and I'm just gonna downshift a couple of gears through this 8-speed transmission into the corner, limited body roll, back on the throttle, and I was low in the revs, and it has enough power to just whoosh. Drops off a little bit at the top, and it's got that fake sound being pumped into the cabin, which I don't love, but you can turn it off as I mentioned. And it just feels like a really fun, really sort of sharp car. And to me, I put it somewhere between kind of the C43 from Mercedes and the Giulia from Alfa Romeo, and how it feels connected to the road, how it feels up on its haunches. It requires very minimal input on the steering wheel. It's got a sharp rack, and I like that. But of course you can go down into commuting mode, into eco mode, and just kind of relax and remember that you're in a luxury car.
The G70 is not just a great car for a Genesis. The G70 is a great car, period. And considering the fully loaded cost is $57,500, you have to ask yourself why you'd pay an additional $10,000 more for a similarly spec'd C43. Of course, the badge on the front has a lot to do with that. The arc of economy car to premium luxury sedan is long as history shows, but Genesis is sure to fast-track this transition if they continue to produce excellent vehicles like the G70 Sport.
Car Cost Canada provides the dealer cost, a list of rebates, plus discounted interest rates. The link is in the description below.